A major concession from May. She'll put her detailed plans for Brexit before Parliament. Rebels on her own side had demanded it to know what she means by the best deal. Labour says she's still threatening a bargain basement Britain.
We would never allow Britain to be sold off on the cheap.
They can't speak for themselves. They'll never speak for Britain.
Also this lunchtime, Donald Trump's big day. He tweets he will build the wall with Mexico and ban Islamist extremists. Here, a family of 3 found dead in a house fire in Reigate. Police are investigating. And MPs put the boot into employers who insist women wear high heels to work.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Alistair Stewart.
Good afternoon. Theresa May made peace with rebels on her own side this lunchtime, granting them what's called a white paper setting out her detailed plans for Brexit. She's already said it all in a speech, but this puts it before Parliament, opening the doors on detailed and divisive debate. It caught Labour on the hop, leaving Jeremy Corbyn asking when, and repeating his charge that she planned a bargain basement Britain of poor public services and low taxes for business. The Prime Minister may have calmed her own side for now, but it means much more hand-to-hand combat, as Labour call it, over the UK's departure from the EU. Here's our political correspondent, Emily Morgan.
Another Wednesday and another Prime Minister's question time.
Are you worried about defeat, Prime Minister?
As Theresa May left Downing Street today for the weekly session, pressure grew for her to publish a white paper setting out her EU exit plan. It was set to dominate in the House, and it was one of her own MPs who started by asking for it.
I set out that bold plan for a global Britain last week, and I recognise there is an appetite in this House to see that plan set out in a white paper, and I can confirm to the House that our plan will be set out in a white paper published in this House.
They liked that, but it appeared to throw the Labour leader.
The Prime Minister has wasted 80 days between the time of the original judgment and the appeal. Could we know when this white paper is going to be available to us? And why it's taken so long to get it?
She refused to say, and Mr Corbyn found his feet again.
The Prime Minister, Mr Speaker, is threatening the EU that unless they give in to her demands, she will turn Britain into a bargain basement tax haven off the coast of Europe.
He's the leader of the party. He can't even agree with his shadow chancellor about Brexit. The shadow chancellor can't agree with the shadow Brexit secretary. He talks about us standing up for Britain. They can't speak for themselves. They'll never speak for Britain.
After yesterday's Supreme Court ruling that Parliament must vote on triggering our exit from the EU, the government is now expected to publish its bill tomorrow. Amendments can then be tabled and debated probably early next week. The Prime Minister has now promised a white paper, a detailed policy document on her Brexit strategy. But Labour and others are still pushing for a meaningful vote on the final deal, which could see the Prime Minister forced to return to the negotiating table if MPs aren't satisfied. Theresa May has successfully headed off a rebellion from within her own party. It's Labour MPs now who could defy their leader by threatening to vote against the Brexit bill.
I do not see that Theresa May is telling the truth when she says Brexit is going to make us a fairer, more equal, more prosperous country. I think that's a lie.
It's fair to say Brexit is testing Parliament to the limit.
And our political correspondent, who you just heard there, Emily Morgan, joins me live from Westminster. Emily, how much of all of that was really about political tactics?
Well, it appears Theresa May has made quite a clever move this morning. She has seen off a rebellion from within her own party. We think around 12 Tory MPs were going to try and amend the Brexit bill, calling for a white paper. Theresa May has made that concession. She didn't want to, but she wasn't prepared to lose over it. What she has done, though, has highlighted the problems that the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, has within his party. We think around 60 MPs could defy him and vote against the Brexit bill. They want a meaningful vote in 2 years' time on the final deal. And if they don't get that, they could vote against it. But Theresa May has reiterated today that they will not get that. They will only be able to vote on the final deal, and if they don't like it, we'll come out of the EU and we will revert to World Trade Organization rules.
Emily, thank you. President Trump is expected to set in motion his controversial plan to build a wall between the United States and Mexico today. It's part of a raft of border security measures which aim to cut illegal immigration. The barrier was a key promise during his presidential campaign.
We will build a great wall along the southern border, and Mexico will pay for the wall.
We will build the wall, you know that.
We're going to build the wall, you know that. We're going to build the wall.
And our Washington correspondent Robert Moore joins me live now. So, Robert, is this the beginning of the implementation of the most contentious of his promises?
Yes, we're going to see in the next couple of hours Donald Trump signing an executive order, essentially beginning the implementation of that most populist and incendiary of his campaign promises, essentially initiating the funding for that wall. There's already several hundred miles of wall and fencing along America's southern border, along its border with Mexico. The idea now is to extend it by another 1,000 miles or so at a cost of $14 billion. Now, it's going to be the biggest construction project in America, certainly since the Hoover Dam in the 1930s. And I've been down there and spoken to many border agents, and almost universally, they doubt the effectiveness of this wall. They point out that people smugglers will always construct tunnels underneath it. They will also potentially simply climb it. In other words, in their view, the desperation of the migrants, the amount of money involved is always going to be greater than the fortifications of the wall itself. So very few people down there believe this wall actually will be effective.
And the controversy does not end with the wall today.
Not at all. We're expecting an avalanche of further executive orders, including President Trump deciding to halt the application of refugees from what he regards as some of the highest risk countries of all, like Syria, like Afghanistan, like Iraq. This is outraging already human rights groups who say this is really turning its back. This is America turning its back on some of the most vulnerable people in the world. And Alistair, to sort of add to the whole controversy, this morning Donald Trump has tweeted that he wants a major investigation into what he calls the voter fraud in the United States. Now, that's almost entirely a conspiracy theory. There's no evidence for it whatsoever. And therefore, really, what we're looking at now is America building a wall that very few people will think will be effective and investigating a fraud that may not even exist.
Robert, thank you. Here, a shortfall in council care home funding totalling £1.3 billion is being covered by private residents, according to new research. Healthcare analysts say those paying for their own care are keeping the crisis-hit homes afloat by paying more than £100 extra every week. Our health editor, Rachel Younger, has been investigating.
At this care home, 4 out of every 5 residents are funded by the council because they simply can't afford the cost of their care.
You're doing very well.
We are thankfully living longer, but the bill for the extra support we need is growing and the burden falling disproportionately on those funding their care privately. People like Annis Harding, who saved hard during a long career with the police. At 87, she's pretty philosophical.
Well, what can you do? We've got to take so many in, that they can't, some of them can't pay, But that's just one of those things you've got to, abide by it.
New research shows that councils currently pay an average fee of £486 a week per person, but found the true cost of the care provided is at least £104 more. That leaves a shortfall of £8,000 a year being picked up by private residents paying over the odds. The pressures on the entire care system, whether residential or home visits, have left both local authorities and private companies struggling to cope. The introduction of the national living wage and 5 years of government funding cuts contributing to 2/3 of councils closing residential homes. The company that runs this one says it's a struggle with councils paying so little.
The company is taking the burden of that cost in providing the care for some people at a lesser rate than others. That is unsustainable, because at the end of the day, people will just move out of this sector.
It's a predicament that's seen Tory-controlled Surrey threaten to raise its council tax by 15% to keep the care system there afloat. But this is a nationwide crisis, and today's figures only underline how fragile and unsustainable our current system is.
Rachel, you mentioned the Tories in Surrey there, but what are the Tories in government saying to you?
Well, they're strangely reluctant to talk about this. They won't put up a minister, despite a number of requests, and instead they keep repeating the same statement, which essentially says that they are providing £7.6 billion for social care over the next 4 years, and it's up to individual councils to decide how to use that. The problem is that doesn't really confront any of these issues. Now, the Prime Minister said last month she was going to hold a review to find a sustainable long-term solution. Well, I asked the Department of Health about that today, and they said they don't know any more information about it. They don't know who's going to lead it, let alone give us a timetable of when it's going to deliver. And that's deeply worrying for the many people having to rely on a very fragile system.
Indeed, Rachel. Thank you. Police have discovered the bodies of 2 adults and a child in a double bed among the ruins of a burnt-down farm cottage in Reigate in Surrey. Colleagues of the male victim raised the alarm when he failed to arrive for work yesterday morning. Correspondent Sejal Carrier is at the scene. Sejal, what have you been able to find out?
Alistair, you might be able to just make out the forensic teams and the teams of detectives that are working in and around the shell of this building, and they're trying to work out 2 things. Firstly, how the fire started, and secondly, how if the bodies that were found inside of the 3 people died as a result of the blaze or whether they were dead before. What we do know is that police officers discovered the bodies of a man, a woman and a child together in a double bed among the smouldering ruins of this cottage that had been burning all night without anyone realising, because, as you might be able to see, it sits in a fairly isolated spot. Police were called when a man who lives here failed to turn up for work, and worried colleagues came here to check up on him. The fire service have spent the morning trying to make what remains of this building structurally safe so the investigation into what happened here could begin.
Sejal, thank you. Still to come, why Japan is getting particularly excited about this year's champion sumo wrestler. But first, MPs say urgent actions needed to stop companies enforcing discriminatory dress codes for women, according to MPs. Report out today reveals that while it's already illegal for firms to insist that women wear high heels, the practice is still widespread. They want tougher laws and fines for firms who break the rules. Francesca Carpenter has more.
High heels in the office, fashion statement or workplace requirement. Do you think about wearing heels to work?
I choose to myself. I'm surprised it still happens that people are forced to.
I definitely complain. I wouldn't be happy about it. It's not the kind of job I want anyway.
I quite like wearing heels. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel sort of like on top of my sort of as best as I can be.
I couldn't deal with it. If someone told me I had to wear heels and do that, I'd cry.
But when Nicola Thorpe arrived at work in flats last year, she was sent home without pay. After refusing to wear high heels, her story hit the headlines. Now MPs say the government should do more to ban sexist dress codes at work.
If it's causing you a problem and you can't walk at the end of the day because you've worn these high heels, or if your skin is coming out in blotches because you can't wear makeup, we have to address that.
Today's report has found hundreds of women have been told to wear heels, dye their hair and wear makeup at work. But this firm in London says appearance is important.
You've got to dress as if you care, and if that means that putting on a pair of heels, however big, makes you feel better and act differently, and therefore that will be reflected in the presentation that you're giving, then I think that's appropriate.
Nicola's petition is calling on the government to make it illegal for employers to ask women to wear high heels at work. So far, it's collected more than 150,000 signatures and will be debated in Parliament in March. Francesca Carpenter, ITV News.
And from behind her laptop, straight into the studio, Nicola Thorpe is with me live, who began all of this. And she's joined there on the right of your screen by Petra Wilton from the Chartered Management Institute. MPs in that report have said that what they really want is that people who did what they did to you to be prosecuted.
Absolutely. As it stands, it costs about £1,200 to take an employer to tribunal. And that's money that I certainly couldn't afford and many women couldn't. And that process even takes 28 weeks. During that time, you'd still have to be wearing heels. So it's important that there is law reform. And if the law works in theory, it has to work in practice. Sure. That's what's paramount.
And that word practice is at the heart of it. So is it your view, then, that the MPs do need to beef up what, after all, is existing legislation? What happened to her is illegal, but it would have cost so much. Is that the bit that needs beefing up?
It is. It's about enforcing it, but it's also about getting really clear messages out to employers. This is the thin end of the wedge. We've just done a survey across members, and 4 out of 5 see discrimination, gender discrimination in the workplace. So it's not just wearing high heels, it's inappropriate comments, and then it comes all the way through to pay, promotion, and a whole range of other factors in the workplace.
Yeah. I mean, the thing I didn't know, because I read it in the newspapers and so on and so forth, but actually you and colleagues have made strong and serious arguments about health issues. And, and there are feet experts coming out in your support.
Yeah.
Talk me through that.
This to me was never just about high heels. It was a gender issue, but delving into the issue of high heels, physically, the issues that can come out of it in terms of foot, back problems, headaches, migraines was extensive. If you have a look at the report, which is readily available for the public. Yeah. And it's also discriminatory against women who have got perhaps disabilities and aren't able to walk in high heels.
The other extraordinary thing about the story, and we were talking about it just before the cameras came to us live, as it were, Nicola was in that position because of an employment agency, whereas PricewaterhouseCoopers, who were the end employers, as it were not a party to it. So is it the agency world that needs the bigger shake-up, or are the big branded names like PwC in need of an elbow?
It is actually, unfortunately, both.
Across the board?
Across the board. I mean, PwC have done some fantastic work around tackling gender discrimination. So, you know, I wouldn't point the finger at them, but what we do see, it is rife across many organisations, and it's not just the agency worker, and we see it across all levels of management too. And it's almost condoned, so we need more people like Nicola to call it out and to actually share best practice on how you can challenge gender discrimination in the workplace. Literally, in a word, have you had an apology?
Not directly.
That's 4 words and it's a no. Nicola and Petra, thank you both very much indeed. A man celebrating his birthday with his wife has died in a suspected hit-and-run in Lancashire. The 63-year-old was walking near Fleetwood Golf Club when he was struck on Tuesday night. Police are calling for the driver who fled the scene to come forward. And MPs are warning postponing the introduction of a new radio system for the emergency services could cost £475 million a year. The report found the new network could require more testing before it's expected on its due date in 2019. A woman whose mother died of bowel cancer has been lobbying MPs today, demanding the screening age be lowered from 60 to 50. With early diagnosis, nearly all bowel cancer sufferers survive. But for Fiona Blackler, it came too late. Our reporter Suzanne Verdi has been speaking to Fiona's daughter, Lauren.
Fiona Blackler died from bowel cancer at 56. Her daughter Lauren believes she could have survived if she'd had routine screening at 50, as they do in Scotland.
She could have been diagnosed 3 times potentially before she actually was, if she'd had the screening available to her. And because that screening wasn't available, that diagnosis came far too late and meant that her cancer couldn't be cured.
Around 4,600 men and women in their 50s are diagnosed with bowel cancer every year. Figures show people diagnosed at an early stage have a 97% survival rate. But if the cancer is picked up later, that falls to just 7%. At the moment, screening for bowel cancer starts at 60 everywhere in the UK, apart from in Scotland, where testing begins at 50. Experts say that's unfair.
Bowel cancer is the second biggest cancer killer
People don't realise it. Yet if you catch it early, you have really good outcomes.
Lauren's petition to the government calling on them to lower the age of bowel screening has so far been signed by more than 250,000 people. Today she headed to Parliament hoping to persuade MPs that testing at 50 will not only save the NHS money but thousands of lives too. Suzanne Verdi, ITV News.
Finally, it's Japan's national sport, but much to its shame, there hasn't been a homegrown sumo grand champion for 18 years. That all changed today when the wrestler known as Kisen Osato won the title in Tokyo. Helena Carter reports on a big victory for a big man.
For nearly 2 decades, Japan has watched and waited for the moment a Japanese wrestler can finally be crowned grand champion of the country's national sport. Wrestler Kisen Osato has won his first title at the New Year Grand Sumo tournament with a record of 14 wins and only 1 loss. For more than 10 years, it's been Mongolians and Hawaiians dominating in the ring, promoted to the highest rank of Yokozuna, leaving Japanese fighters in their wake. Until now. Getting down on his knees in the ceremony, Kisen Osato said he humbly accepts, "I will devote myself to be worthy of the title of Yokozuna." Japan's sumo wrestlers hold celebrity status, their skill, size and strength captivating the crowds for centuries. Facing a frenzy of photographers, A-lister Kisen Osato says his win will fuel even more success. He had a message for all his supporters. "I want to become much stronger and work hard so that I can report good results and repay their kindness." And after becoming a national treasure, what more could you want than this? A traditional celebratory fish. Helena Carter, ITV News.
And that is it. Mary will be here at 6:30 from all of us. Bye-bye.